Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, welcome. We'll be getting underway here shortly. We'll just wait for see if anyone else joins, and we'll get going. So just a couple minutes. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Jason Siegle. I'm a senior coach at Carmichael Training Systems. Joining me today is Chris Carmichael, founder of Carmichael Training Systems, four-time finisher of Ruta. Today we're going to talk about preparing for Ruta, some of the unique aspects of the race itself. I'm going to let Chris start out giving a little bit of history of our relationship with Ruta, and then we'll go into some training and specifics to the race.
Thank you, Jason. This is Chris Carmichael. We've had a long history with La Ruta Los Conquistadores, and it started when 9 years ago, when I was turning 50. I really wanted to do something epic in nature, and that really kind of challenged me. And La Ruta, as it's fondly known as, was considered the hardest mountain bike race out there, and we had already been participating in events like the Leadville 100 and things like that, but La Ruta was sort of just known as this unbelievably tough, challenging event where you were in the jungle of Costa Rica, and you know, there was mud knee deep, and crossing rivers and carrying your bike, and that you start on the Pacific side and you finish on the Caribbean side. So I said, let's do it. And so I signed up, and then I gave it a little bit more thought. I said, well, let me invite some others to join me as well, and don't want to do it alone. So we opened it up to basically 10 athletes to join me, and they did, and we had a great time. Back then, La Ruta was a 4-day event. Now it's a 3-day event, and it was every bit as challenging as we thought it was going to be. It starts in on the Pacific side. You start right on the beach, literally on the beach, and it follows the road, or the La Ruta, the road of the Conquistadores that they took when they came to Costa Rica. And a lot of people think that they went from east to west. They actually came from the Pacific side and went east. And when you finish, you come right down this finishing ramp onto the beach into the Caribbean, a nice, beautiful bay there, and there's a big party afterwards, and everybody's usually in the water, and it's a great time. The event, as I say, has changed slightly. It's only 3 days, but the first day is the toughest day. It's the day that you go through La Carreta, which is sort of the most famous part of the race, which is the jungle section, and it normally takes me between 2.5 to 3 hours to get through that section. very hot, incredibly humid. A lot depends on where the rainy season in Costa Rica is from about now till sort of mid-October. So a lot depends upon how much rain they have. And La Ruta is kind of right at the tail end as the rainy season is coming to an end. And if there's a lot of rain, then it can be very muddy. And you should expect that there'll be sections where you're carrying your bike up steep embankments that are muddy, and you'll take a couple steps up and you'll slide back 2 or 3 steps. Can be up to your knees in mud in certain sections. There are rivers that you'll be needing to cross, carrying your bike across on your back. None of it is dangerous of any extent, but it does make a very challenging race. As I said, the key to it is not starting too hard. That first stage, within the first 10 kilometers, you start up a big climb. It's about 5-6K, very steep. It's very hot. You start early in the morning, but it's up to 90 degrees and very humid. You roll for about 2 hours, and then you hit the jungle section. And getting through that jungle section is kind of the most critical aspect of the entire race, making sure you have good energy. There is an aid station. As you enter the jungle, you definitely will want to stop and make sure that you've hydrated enough. I recommend racing with a Camelback or a hydration pack, and you'll probably want to refill that. I know that I've done that before, because like I say, it takes 3 hours to get through that section, and it is extremely hot, very humid. You want to make sure you're not, and there's no other aid stations in that section. So you want to make sure that you've got enough water and fluids to get through that section. When you come out of the jungle, there's still quite a bit of racing to go. You've got a 20K road climb, not that steep, but it's long. When you do come out of the jungle, there is an aid station. And we will CTS if you're with us. We've got our people located there as well, with the mechanic who will hose down your bike, lube up your chain, things like that. On the way, there are a few key things you want to make sure you pack in your jersey or hydration pack, because you want to carry an extra chain link, because if the chain can get really dried out there, you can snap a chain easy. You also want to make sure that you have a little bit of spray lube, of lube that you can put on your chain as well to help aid in breaking the chain. You also want to, very important, is you want to be able to have something to be able to clean out your cleats, and also the mud that can pack in between the fork and also the chainstay of the tires, because it can get, as I say, extremely muddy, and you're going to want to not be looking for that stick or something like that. You're going to want to have something, a tool with you, to be able to scrape out your cleats, be able to scrape out your where the mud builds up on your bike, and get moving. The key is to get moving and not spend too long in that jungle section, because the longer you spend in there, the slower you're going to be throughout the whole day. So you want to move quickly through it, keeping up with your hydration and your eating habits. Then you've got that 20K climb, and then it's pretty rolly to eventually getting to the finish. But the first day is the hardest day. Typically, the fastest riders will be right around 5.5 hours, depending. The course changes slightly each year, 5.5 to 6 hours. Before, in the past, it's taken me 9 hours to 10 and a half hours to get through that first day. So anticipate it being your toughest day out there. Day 2 has changed over the years, and every year it's a little different. Typically, we go from basically sea level outside of San Jose, and we climb up a volcano up to about 10,000 feet. And the route up the volcano has changed over the years, and Roman, the race organizer, always kind of likes to surprise people with day 2, but just anticipate a lot of climbing. The other thing that happens on day 2 is when you get to the top, the last, I would say, 30 to 40 minutes, it's cooling off. A lot of times you're in the fog, and when you're up top, it can be 55 degrees and a cool rain falling when you start the descent. So you're definitely going to want to make sure you have a jacket, some sort of shell that you can put on, maybe even some long finger gloves. I've been up top where it's been as cool as high 40s with the rain falling, and you don't necessarily feel that obviously on the climb up because you're working so hard, but on the descent, without a shell, without some coverage, you can get slightly hypothermic. So you're going to definitely want to make sure that you've got a jacket with you. If you're with CTS, we have an aid station up there. We'll be able to pass out jackets. Want to make sure that you're keeping up with all your hydration and fueling needs throughout the course of that. The descent, there is usually a section in there where you go through the children's heads, they call it, really heavy rock garden. It is rideable, but it is very technical. So a lot of people end up walking through some of that rock garden. The rest of the descent is really pretty straightforward. You open up about 2/3 of the way down to a road descent, and then it's a fast drop from there to the finish. It is not a long stage. You should anticipate that you've got it's 30K up and it's 30K down. So it's about 60K, but it ends up taking easily, 4+ hours in the saddle. The last day is a unique day in itself. You've got a couple climbs of about 5 to 8K, and you're slowly dropping down to from a relatively high altitude of about 7,000 feet, dropping down to sea level as you're heading into the Caribbean side of Costa Rica. And there are a few rivers that you'll have to cross over on a train trestle. You've probably seen some photos of that, and definitely interesting, especially when trains come through there. You'll have to move to the side and hold your bike. They're not like barreling through, but it has happened that a train will come as cyclists are on the track. So there is clearance to move to the side, but just anticipate that it is an active train station. I remember I've done the race 4 times. I remember asking Roman, the race director, what happens. As I was going into the 4th time I did it, what happens if a train comes? Because I'd never experienced that. And Roman's response to me was, well, it hasn't happened. Well, sure enough, it did happen, and there was room for the train and the athletes to get by. It's definitely the last 30 kilometers of that stage. It's flat, crossing over these railroad trestles. You have one section where you're going to ride right down the middle of the railroad track for about 5 to 8 kilometers, and it just kind of beats the snot out of you, even on a full suspension bike. Then you get off, and then you're riding on the beach in the last 10 kilometers, going into the finish. If there's been a lot of rain, there's a lot of very deep kind of puddles that you'll be going through. Some of them up to your crank and above as you're riding through them. Some of the sand is a little soft, but it just adds to the whole experience of the event. And then you come into the finish. As I say, you'll come into this bar that is patio that opens up to this beautiful bay on the Caribbean. You'll come down this ramp right onto the beach, and there'll be a really nice party going on. And if you want, that's the perfect time to have a beer and go swimming in the water and enjoy what you accomplished. But La Ruta was a transforming event for me as an athlete. I've done most of the hardest mountain bike multi-day events out there, and La Ruta definitely is the toughest out there that I've done. And it was every bit as hard, challenging, and beautiful. There's some just wonderful sceneries of Costa Rica. It's a great country, wonderful, friendly people. We have a race package. We've done it every year for the last 10 years now. And so we know how to take care of our athletes during the race, which is helpful, because what you don't want to be doing is finishing a stage and having to wait for, 2-3 hours to get transported to a hotel or to a meal or things like that. All the things from an operation standpoint, whether it's the rain jacket on top of the volcano, or the aid station after getting out of the jungle, or making sure we get a meal in you right away when you finish, a recovery shake, being there at the aid stations, getting you to the hotel, getting you cleaned up, making sure your bike is clean and ready to roll for the next day. Those are all the things that we kind of focus on and providing for the athletes that join us. I'm going to turn it over now to Jason Siegle, who is one of our top coaches out in our Santa Ynez location in California. Jason is a Cat 1 bike racer, mountain biker, and he will also be joining the team for La Ruta this year, and will be racing it this year as our coach on the ground, working with our team at La Ruta. Jason?
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, as you hear, it's a pretty massive adventure, and one of the cooler events that anyone can do. What I want to do is start off talking about the demands of the race. What are some of the unique demands that we have with this race? As Chris had said, it used to be 4 days, now it's 3 days, and the route, it changes year to year. So every year it's not exactly the same thing. But what we can say is it's 3 days, roughly 140 miles, roughly almost 6,000 meters of climbing, which is over 20,000 feet of gain. That first stage is close to 60 with, nearly 4,000 meters of gain. And there's a couple of cutoff times, one at the 40-mile mark, and then at the finish is a 12-hour finishing time cutoff. Stage 2, roughly 47 miles, 8,000 plus feet of climbing. Stage 3, much less climbing, generally descending like Chris had said, roughly 37 miles, by far the shortest. And then probably the biggest environmental piece to the race that really makes it unique is the heat and humidity that you'll face. And as Chris said, also potential cold that you'll face when you do stage 2 and you get to nearly 10,000 feet in elevation. So it kind of throws a bit of everything at you in terms of challenges. It's long, varying weather, in multiple days. So knowing these specifics, what are the race demands that we're really up against with this race? So even for the fastest people, it's going to take 10 plus hours over the 3 stages. As Chris said, a lot of people are taking 9 to 10 hours on stage 1 alone. So 10 hours would be, the winning times for the elite. So we know that it's going to be lots of time in the saddle over 3 days. There's going to be long climbs. So, those are going to vary stage to stage. There's going to be a lot of steep, uphill climbing, a lot of steep descending, extreme weather, hot, humid to cold, rain, mud, all of that, high altitude. And then probably what separates this race from a lot of other mountain bike races is just the extent to which you'll probably be walking with and or carrying your bike through different sections, whether that's muddy bits in the jungle, which, are quite common, to the trestle bridges that you encounter on day 3. So those are some of the unique special demands of this race that you want to think about when you're developing training for the race itself. So with that in mind, the big training focuses are going to be on total ride volume, your endurance miles, and for most of you, this race is quite a bit more intensive in terms of duration than what you're used to. Just from stage 1 alone, is like doing Leadville, really hard day on itself. So building your base of training to, get to where you're doing multiple back-to-back longer endurance rides to help simulate the big days you're going to do at Leadville. At La Ruta. You may never, and I wouldn't promote trying to match a 9 or 10 hour day, but getting to where you're doing, 6, 7, a 7-hour day with a 5-hour day or back-to-back 6-hour days. The other thing is we know we want to focus on sustained climbing, longer climbing. So with that, I would say like tempo level intervals, which for us are a bit sub-threshold, and trying to make those tempo intervals in the longer duration, working your way to, from maybe 3 by 15 minute tempo intensity, which for us is, 85 to 90% of your threshold FTP, to getting anywhere to like 2 by 45 minute length tempo intervals. That will help you be ready for, long, hard race pace and give you some of that muscular endurance to be pushing hard all day long. Muscle tension intervals are also something that someone can do. Really, that's low cadence work because a lot of the climbing is sustained and quite steep. And that's kind of unique. Like the grades can be backbreakingly steep, well over 20% in severity. So, getting in some work at low cadences will help you handle that better. So that's something you can mix in to your training. So as we, now we're about 3 months out, as we're getting closer, we want to be working on building that intensity, building the length of these intervals to more match the specific demands of this race, which is long and sustained climbing and lots of low cadence work. Some of the other unique demands that we want to consider for training are there's going to be hiking, hike-a-bike sections. There's going to be carrying of your bike. So you want to spend some time adding that in, because it definitely is a stress that we're not usually used to. So if whether that's finding trails that you normally wouldn't ride, or you're just purposely hiking on some of the trails that you do ride, to get some of that hiking with your bike mixed into your ride can be a really good addition. Also, some just general upper body stuff, push-ups, planks, core, all of those sort of exercises can be really helpful, because you're having to use those strengths more than you would in other races. Mountain biking, I would say, is more upper body needed than if you're doing a road event. And that's even, that's additionally true in a race where you're having to pick up and carry your bike, especially if it's muddy and it gets a bunch of mud on it, is going to be a bit heavier to lift. So trying to add in some core, upper body, and some hiking as well can really help you, handle the demands of the 3-day races. With that in mind, when we have all this training and this long race, we want to think about nutrition. And there's some general guidelines we want to think about nutrition and hydration. Here I'm thinking specifically for the Ruta. So in general, 30 to 40 ounces an hour is a bit high, but with the high temperatures, high humidity of the Ruta, you're going to need to drink more to keep up. Last year, that first day was extremely hot, and you saw a lot of people really suffer because of the heat. One of CTS athletes, Larissa Connors, she was the first female finisher, but she paid the price for how hard she rode on day one and ended up having to quit the race. So, doing a good job of keeping up on your hydration nutrition can help minimize some of that. Like Chris said, a hydration pack is recommended, particularly because of all the mud. It's hard to keep mud off your bottles, and you may not want to have that contamination. So that can be really helpful. You also want to consider getting enough sodium. So because you're going to be sweating more, your sodium intake is going to need to be higher, because you're going to be losing actively more salt from sweating than you would when you're not sweating quite as much. And that's probably the biggest challenge, is getting enough. And that's where CTS support can be super helpful. The ability to get another Camelback, another hand up of fluid and nutrition throughout the days can be super helpful. But this is also something you want to practice when you're at home. So your stomach is just like the rest of your body, and it can be improved through training. And in order to handle drinking 30 to 40 ounces an hour, it's going to take some practice. If you're lucky enough to live where it's hot, you'll be able to do that easily in the lead-in. Although in the beginning of the fall, it may not be as hot anymore. You may consider doing some indoor trainer rides or overdressing to help increase the amount you're sweating, so that you can, and then also increase the fluid that you're actually consuming per hour. And over time, you can train your gut to be okay with that higher intake of fluids. In terms of nutrition, for most people, we're looking at 200 to 300 calories per hour. And this is basically determined by output. So nice way to measure it, if you have a power meter on your bike, 25% to 33% of what you expend on the bike is what you're trying to consume. So for instance, if you burned 1,000 kilojoules measured by your power meter, you would want to be somewhere between 250 and 330 calories. If you're in that range, you should be able to keep up the energy needed for the day. More than that, and you're likely to deal with GI distress, but because your stomach just isn't able to process more than that easily. The one thing you want to consider with this is kind of the combination of how much of your calories is coming from your hydration, how much of it is coming from the food you're eating. With this race, you're probably maybe thinking more of your hydration as just fluid, not really a ton of calories, and more of your food being the calorie intake, just because the sheer amount of hydration that's needed, you'd probably get too many calories if you made it your main source of getting your calories. The other thing to consider when you're thinking about your hydration and nutrition strategy for the race is the different intensities that you'll do in a race. So like on the steep climbs, it's a little harder to eat a solid bar. So that may be the point where you're trying to get in more liquid form of nutrition. And then, the places, the downhills, the flatter bits are where you're not breathing quite so heavily. You can get in more solid food. So it may not be that you just do the same thing the whole day. Also, as the ride goes longer, your preferences change pretty dramatically. So the best thing I can say is, experiment now in your training rides and record what you're doing, and make a plan ahead of the race, kind of what you're going to start out eating, what you're doing at what time, throughout the day. Your best practice is to spread everything out and take it in small doses and start early and do it often throughout the entire day. The biggest thing I see in athletes I work with is that first 45 minutes is underutilized. And in training and events, you want to start taking those calories in from the very beginning. I even recommend getting 50 to 100 calories like 15 minutes before you start. That way, you're really keeping on top of things throughout the day. So you're going to be doing that, practicing this in all your training rides, particularly those long rides that you're doing that are, sort of simulating the duration of the Ruta that you're getting ready for. Some other specific considerations that we want to be thinking about with the Ruta that are really unique to the event is the start times. So on the first 2 days, we have extremely early start times. So around 5 a.m. So with that, we need to be thinking about, how early is reasonable to wake up. Ideally, you'd like to have 3 or 4 hours before an event to wake up and eat breakfast. But with a 5 a.m. start, that's probably not a reality. Maybe 3 a.m. you're waking up to be at the start line. If that's the case, you have 2 hours before the start. I wouldn't try to eat more than around 500 calories. That way you can have it digested before you start racing. And so that's something I would try to experiment with. Do some of your rides early in the morning to try to get what is a good breakfast for you. With only a 2-hour window, you're really going to want to keep that to a primarily carbohydrate meal. So you don't want a lot of those 500 calories to be coming from fat or protein. You want to keep it mainly carbohydrate because that's the fuel you'll be needing throughout the day. And the other course-related considerations are all the hiking. So, there can be some really steep hiking. With that, one equipment thing is your shoes. So with the hiking, you may want to look into getting some different toe spikes for your shoes, something to help you get grip in the mud. You can find those online pretty easily. You can get some longer metal toe spikes. That can be really helpful. A second pair of shoes could also be nice if the first day is extremely wet and muddy. Having a dry pair to use the next day can be extremely helpful. But I think a lot of times people don't think about hiking and having traction. So having some good toe spikes in the shoes to help you dig in and get traction will help you get up some really steep pitches that are potentially muddy. Again, extreme weather. So we have, we'll see if, this is summertime in conditions down in Costa Rica. So we'll see heat, into the 90s with similar humidity, 80 to 100% humidity. That is a very difficult challenge. So trying to simulate that in some way at home. If you live where it's hot, that's not so hard to do. Indoors on the trainer with no ventilation is a way. Going and spending some time in sauna, do some sauna training is another potential way to help acclimate to the heat. Just getting it now isn't going to help you for them. By that time, the adaptation you're making now would have worn off. So you're going to want to be doing that in that last month beforehand, and keeping that heat training right up until you're headed down to Costa Rica. And that can be super helpful to how things go, particularly that first day where you're in the jungle and it's really hot and humid. And really the last thing I'll say about this race, and Chris touched on it, is it's mimicking what the Conquistadores did way back in the 1560s, and they were on a quest. And in a lot of ways, this race is kind of from an era of when adventure racing was big. And so you need to come with an open mind and expect that who knows what you're going to encounter. Be ready for the route to change in the middle of the day, or to get off track slightly, or to deal with adversity that you haven't been planning. If you expect to have a perfect day, I think you're setting yourself up to struggle to a degree. So being ready to be flexible and adapt through the day is a big part of Ruta. And part of what makes it so amazing is it's unpredictable. You're in an area of the world that is really unique. It has 5% of the world's total bird, plant, and animal populations, and it only makes up a 1/100th of the total landmass of the world. So it's a really diverse place, and just try to take that all in when you're thinking about the day. In terms of equipment, there's a few things that you want to consider. First is you're going to probably want mud tires, unless it's a really dry year. You'll want mud tires for those first couple of days. And for that last day, you may consider switching to a dry kind of all-condition tire. The last day is more sandy and you're on the railway for a bunch of it, so you may not need the mud tires on that day, but you'll definitely want mud tires. Depending on the clearance on your bike, larger tires are nice, but be careful. The wider you go, the less clearance you have for that mud. So, depending on the clearance on your frame, that may be something you want to adjust to make sure that you're not having wheels that don't spin. In terms of gearing, we recommend the lowest gearing you can get now with 1x bikes. Starting point is they tend to come with 32 front chainring with a 1050 cassette or somewhere thereabouts. You may even want to go lower and get 28x50 gearing. That'll really help you a lot for all the steep climbing you'll encounter. It'll allow you to ride a lot more of it than you would otherwise. And then we've said this a couple of times, hydration pack, maybe multiple hydration packs. If you're with us, you could have those waiting for you at the different aid stations that we'll be at, so you're not having to wait to have something refilled. But that's going to be the best way for you to keep your hydration coming in and not have it get contaminated, where bottles, you may get a bunch of stuff on them from all the mud that you'll encounter. So the hydration pack's a little safer bet.
Hey, Jason, I'll jump in here on
Sure.
adding a little bit. In regards to the tires on the first day, we've always gone to a more narrow tire for that first day because it gives a little more clearance, and that's really helpful as the mud starts to build up, and you'll see many people trying to figure out how to get the mud out that's built up in between their tire and their frame. So going slightly more narrow is recommended for day one. Then we switch to a more standard tire for the rest of the race. Adding to just some of the things that I've experienced, they'll have a start time, and sometimes that gets delayed. So just anticipate that there'll be a 5 a.m. start, and for whatever reason, it's delayed for an hour before it starts. That's not unusual in La Ruta to have things like that happen. Make sure that you've got, I would say, some type of additional sodium that you can either add, whether they're a type of tablet that you can add to effervescent tablet to your bottles or things like that. Just the amount of sodium, it's obviously all very much individualized, but because you're drinking so much, you're going to want to make sure that your sodium intake is high, and that should be sodium citrate, sodium chloride, as your main sources of sodium during the course of the race. Jason's point about gearing is really important. When 1x's first came out, a lot of people went down there. I remember in Costa Rica, and they just didn't have a low enough gear for some of the climbs. On the second day, as I say, that's a day that is always it's always slight changes to the course. We still went up the volcano, but we had a couple road climbs going into it, and these road climbs were so incredibly steep. It was amazing. They were like 30 plus %, and I don't know how anybody went down these things, but where there was shade from trees overhanging. On some of these road climbs, there was like a green, mossy kind of growth on the road. And if you hit that, you immediately spun your wheel and you were off and pushing. So some of the steepest climbs that I've experienced there were actually on pavement. And having enough gearing is really critical. So I would definitely recommend making sure that you've got some of the lowest gearing possible, because it's amazing how steep some of these climbs can be. Then kind of last I would say is making sure that I would have a couple pairs of shoes, because shoes that you use the first day just may not even be usable the next day. So because of just all the mud and the river crossings and things like that, you're going to definitely want at least 2 pairs of mountain bike shoes. Good tip on having really good pointy spikes in the front to get up some of these steep inclines in the mud. To give you an idea of how steep some of these things can be, is usually there's these trenches that you go through, and you actually there'll be the various competitors will have to help each other out. You'll lift the bike over your head and you'll pass it to somebody who's standing at the top of this trench. He'll take the bike, and then you'll scurry up this trench yourself, and then the person behind, you'll take their bike and they'll scurry up, and then you'll get your bike and you'll go on. But it's usually not something you experience in mountain bike racing, what we're used to. So anticipate some of this stuff being really steep, and so much so that the competitors are kind of helping each other out in order to get up some of these trenches, so to speak. The other thing I would say is making sure that you've got a couple pairs of glasses, eyewear, packing an additional pair or something that can clean your lenses is probably a wise choice as well. Other thing I'll add is I picked up some sort of bacterial infection going into my last La Ruta, and I started on some antibiotics going into it. Didn't realize, or it was on the prescription, but didn't didn't pay attention. And there's a sun sensitivity to some antibiotics that you're taking, and you can experience being hypersensitive to sun and heat. And I experienced that on my last La Ruta, and it was definitely not fun. And it took me a little while to figure out what was going on. So I would just kind of keep that in mind. Yeah. So what we'll do now is open it up to some questions. Feel free to type in the questions, and we'll everybody should see them, and we'll type in the response.
Yeah, or if you have a question, you want to unmute yourself to share it, that would be okay as well. Maybe one last thing to add that Chris made me think of is maybe extra socks, like for some of those aid stations. If you've been trenching through all the water crossings in the mud, being able to get your feet dry can be something to consider as well. John, you have a question?
Yes. Is it advisable, if possible, to bring more than one bike?
No. One bike is enough. It's just, you know, kind of keeping up with that is probably more of a challenge. I would just, we have mechanics there and they can change tires, but during the race, you wouldn't really be able to do a bike change. That would be difficult. Your bike should be fine for, you know, all the stages. The main thing you want to look at is some tire changes, but I would not advise bringing two bikes.
Yeah, if anything, just bring spare parts so that you can fix your one bike so you can keep going. Okay, Max is asking, would you recommend a hardtail or full suspension? Chris, what's your recommendation?
I've done it on both, and the first year I did it on a hardtail, I was 50 years old. I'm 59 now. The years afterwards, I rode dual suspension, and the time you really want the dual suspension is when you're on the train tracks on the last day. And you have, you know, almost 10K of riding right down the middle of these things. And if you're on a full suspension, it just beats the snot out of you. And so I would definitely go with a dual suspension. The other stages, you know, when you have the rock garden, dual suspension is helpful. The others, it doesn't matter so much. And actually, you know, when you need it, it's really helpful. The rock garden and the last day, that's a long way to go with just a hardtail on the train tracks.
Yeah, there's definitely some advantages both directions. Probably the other thing is the full suspension is gonna provide you with better traction potentially, and it's gonna save some wear and tear. And it is a long 3 days, so you know any bit of freshness you can take forward day to day is definitely going to be quite helpful. Bruce is asking if you can bring a non-riding spouse along. That is an option. I don't know the price of that off the top of my head, but if you contacted our athlete services, they'd be more than happy to assist in that matter. But it is an option. We do have one athlete right now that is currently doing that.
Yeah, you can definitely bring a non-riding spouse, and that's fairly common that we have them with us. And yeah, it's they usually are involved, and we recruit them into helping out at some of the aid stations and things like that when we're out there with athletes. So not a problem. Our athlete service rep can give you the details around a non-riding spouse attending as well.
John, your concerns about the mechanical side. I mean, it's not a bad idea to bring a derailleur with you. You know, hanger, some of those basic parts. So, you know, bringing those spares is definitely a good idea, and you can have those, you know, with our support crew on course. Probably easier to transport that anyway than bringing a second bike.
Yeah, that's a good point. A derailleur hanger is a good thing to have. A spare set of pedals also. You know, those are, I would make sure that your bike, you've got fresh pads, rotors are in good shape. They'll get worn down really quickly on just day one with all the mud and braking that you'll be doing with all the grit and stuff in there. So definitely go in with some fresh pads and rotors. But a rear derailleur hanger is a good thing to pack, because that could typically what can happen sometimes, not typically, but what can happen sometimes is when you're flying down with your bike, the rear derailleur hanger can get damaged, and so having a fresh one to put in there. The rear derailleur's probably a good thing if you got an extra one to pack, but another set of pedals for sure, and a little bit of chain lube, spare chain link in there as well. Some, as I said, some chain lube, something to clean your mud out through your pedals and your cleats, and also between the tire and the chain stays and fork stays. So you're not trying to find a piece of, a stick or something to do that during stage one. And also more narrow tires, 1.9s, even 2.0s are about right for stage one, and then we'll go up to a 2.2 or 2.3 for the additional stages is fine. But having that little bit more width between your tire and the frame is helpful a lot on stage one.
Yeah, and Chris is well versed with the mud stick. For our muddy year at Dirty Kansas, he introduced everybody to it, and now you'll see at races like that, they actually provide a painter's stir stick in registration. So something like a painter stick, a good tire leather, even like the thick popsicle type sticks are a good thing to keep in your, tucked under your bib shorts or in your pocket, where they're easy to access, so you can easily clean out chain stay in the fork of your bike, keep yourself rolling. Any other questions?
I will say that we'll send you an email with a discount code if you want to join our CTS crew for La Ruta and joining Coach Jason. Then we'll offer you $100 off the sign-up price. So we'd love to have you. We've got, I think, 4 more slots open, and then we'll be sold out. A lot of fun, definitely life-changing event. I've done it 4 times. I'll go back, but I'm not going back this year. I will go back, but I probably have 1 more in me, but it's definitely a cool event. I stayed in Costa Rica the last time I went. I stayed in Costa Rica and spent a week after the event and had a great time. Enjoyed it a lot. I stayed at a buddy who has a surf camp. This is kind of a funny story. He has a surf camp on Playa Hermosa, and it's a great place. And I surf a little bit. I'm not great, but I enjoy it. And I remember him telling me, listen, you need to understand when you get out there, you might see a crocodile, and they tend to follow the edge of the beach, where they'll swim from one freshwater river to another. And so you might see one, but don't be worried. There's never been an attack by a surfer or by one of these crocodiles. I'm like, wait a second. These are big crocodiles, and American crocodiles, 10, 12 feet long. And he says, it's really not the crocodiles you have to worry about when you're out there surfing. It's the bull sharks. So don't worry about the crocodiles. It's the bull sharks. And I'm like, oh, that makes me feel a lot better. I don't have to worry about the crocodiles, just the bull sharks. I feel a lot better now. Anyway, I had a great vacation. I saw no crocodiles or not while surfing by any means, or had any experiences with bull sharks either. So, and I surfed the morning break and the afternoon one. So it's a great country. I enjoyed it, and I'll be back eventually and hope you all can join us. Thanks for coming to our webinar.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Like Chris said, to all of you that attended, you'll be given a $100 off code if you do decide to register. This webinar has been recorded and will be up on our website after we're finished here. So any of the information from it, the slides and all of that will be available on our website for future viewing. Once again, thank you guys for joining, and I hope you found this helpful, and we hope to see some of you joining us this year as in Ruta. Thank you.